Hi, also I have another video for you involving the installation of an XTRONS head unit into a car. This time we're going to be installing this, the XTRONS IAP9250XFS, into my 2017 Fiat 500x. The factory head units developed some problems and I thought it would be a good time to upgrade. So I thought I'd bring you along on the process, specifically because XTRONS doesn't include any installation instructions whatsoever in regards to this head unit. So let's get started. First off, what comes in the box? Well, first is the head unit itself. As you can see here, it's very thin, which is really cool. And on the back we have our different electrical connections here and here. And it also comes with a bezel specific to a 500X, which is great. The downside is, as you can see, that there's no satin aluminum trim on this bezel like there is on our factory bezels. So at some point during the video you may see this change because I'm going to try to visually improve upon this a little bit. Also included is what they euphemistically call a user manual. Unfortunately, the only thing that's really useful in here in terms of the physical installation of the unit are these pinouts here that explain what the different connections on the back of the unit do. The entire rest of this manual simply discusses the apps and menus and setting things up. Again, no installation instructions included for the physical installation of this system. We also have a whole bunch of connectors and cables here, and I think when people see this, this is where they get scared and say, I can't possibly do this. This is too difficult. And it's not the case. This is actually a lot easier than it looks. What we need to do is to physically convert the wiring that's existing in the car into connections that we can plug into the back of the XTRONS. And that's what the majority of these cables do. This particular cable has a Fiat Chrysler plug on it, and that will plug into the factory wiring. And it converts all that wiring into these connections. Now we're going to take these connections and plug the ones that we need into their other cables, and these are the connections that plug into the back of the XTRONS. So we're simply going to match up connector to connector to convert from Fiat Chrysler to XTRONS. And that's all this does. Now keep in mind that a lot of these wires are not specific to the 500X. There's going to be a whole bunch of them that we're not going to be using. Honestly, there's only going to be a couple that we're going to be using out of this. We just need to know which ones. And that's what I'm going to help you with. Now, the rest of the cables, we have two cables that plug into the back of the XTRONS to provide USB ports. These are, again, generic cables not specific to Fiat. But as you know, we have a USB port in our center console, and we can reuse that instead of using those cables. XTRONS includes this cable here, which will adapt the existing factory USB wiring into a regular USB port, which we would then plug into this cable to plug it into the XTRONS. Now the important thing with this cable they've included is that this end has no locking connection. The wiring that's in the car now has a locking connection to prevent it from coming undone. This lacks that. So what you might want to do, you could tape this together and hope for the best. Or you can go out and buy yourself one of these. This is a USB adapter specific to Fiat Chryslers. And it's got the same connections as this one does, but it has the locking tab on it. So once you plug this into the factory wiring, it's not coming undone unless you press down on the tab. I'll try to put a link in the description below as where you can get one of these. I just had this one left over. So here we have two antennas. One I believe is for 4G because you can turn this into a 4G hotspot. The other is for satellite radio, I think. Again, no instructions included, right? This is either a speaker or a microphone. I legitimately have no idea what it's for. And then we have this. This is the CAN bus module. And let me explain what this is. So back in the old days, when cars were simple and cars had very few electrical or electronic devices in them, all of the different devices could be wired directly to each other. It's called discrete wiring. So when you pull that light switch on your dashboard to turn the lights on, that was wired directly to the lights and it directly turned them on and off. Well, in modern cars with all of these electronic sensors and computers and electronic features and things like that, that kind of discrete wiring is no longer feasible. So the industry came up with a solution called CAN bus, and that stands for Controller Area Network Bus. And what that basically means is you have a whole bunch of little computers scattered around your car, and they're all connected together with a network, a two-wire network called CAN bus. And all of the electronic and electrical devices in your car are discretely wired to the nearest controller. So for example, let's go back to the lights. So on a modern car, you turn that little light switch, it's on your dashboard, and what that does is it's discretely wired to your instrument cluster, which is a controller on this network. And the instrument cluster says, hey, they want the lights on. They turn that information into a data packet, and that gets sent over this two-wire CAN bus network, and the controller that your lights are directly wired to receives that data packet, says, hey, they want the lights on, and that controller makes it happen. So the XTRONS unit needs several CAN bus signals to function properly, and this module will interface with the network in our Fiats and send the necessary signals to the head unit to do whatever it has to do. So things like the parking brake is on, the brakes have been pressed, the car is on, the car is off, a door is open, it's been put in reverse. Those kinds of things are coming over CAN bus. And again, these are signals that the head unit needs to function properly. So that's what that module is for. In a little bit, we'll go out to the car and we'll do what disassembly we need to do to get the factory head unit out. But one thing you're going to want to have with you when you do that is this. This is a pinout of the factory Fiat Chrysler connector that's in your car. And it shows what all of these different pins are for. And when you get out there and you take out the factory radio, you're going to want to look at the connector on your car and figure out what signals you have coming into it. Because these 500Xs were sold with different head units, some of them with more features than others. So you may or may not have all of these signals in your car, which means you may or may not need to connect some of these to these. Okay? Does that make sense? So I will again put a link in the description below where you can get a copy of this online, print it out, and use this when you get out to the car. Okay? So I've been out to my car, I've looked at the factory wiring, and these are the signals that I have on my car. Now I have the base model Uconnect 3, just a basic radio with 4 speakers, so there's not a lot going on here. We have connections you're going to find on any car, which is battery positive, ground, and then the wiring here for the speaker. So there's 4 speakers, 2 wire per speaker. We also have 2 sets of CAN bus signals for the car's network. We have the signals for the auxiliary input jack, left and right, and the ground for it, and then we have the auxiliary detect, so the radio can detect when something's been plugged into the port. We also have here mystery signal. I don't know what that is because it's not here in the index. I suspect it might be a signal for when the parking brake is enabled, but I don't know for sure. So for comparison, I have another car here. This is a Fiat 500, a newer model. And as you can see, a lot of these connections are in the same place, and you would expect that. These are standardized connectors, but there's extra pins here for extra features. We have an extra pin here for a satellite antenna. We have extra pins here for a CD input. And over here, we have extra inputs for a backup camera, which my car does not have. So again, take your dashboard apart, look at the connector that's in there, mark off on here which wires you have and which wires you don't, and then look them up over here and figure out what you've got. Once you've done that, it simply becomes a matter of looking at the cables that came with the XTRONS. You have the bundle of cables that plugs into the factory harness, and you have the bundles of cables that plug into the XTRONS, and all of the wires are labeled. For example, we have a harness here, one that I'm not using in my car, and it has a whole bunch of labels on each of the wires. Again, here's another bundle. This is actually the bundle that you use for the backup camera. And as you can see, camera labeled there, camera power, things like that. And on the other side that plugs into the factory wiring harness, you're going to see the same labels. All you do is plug in cables where you need to convert from the factory wiring to the XTRONS. It's as simple as that. Just match up the labels that are applicable to your car. So we're out in the car, and the eagle-eyed viewers among you probably noticed that the XTRONS is already installed. I would have preferred to have done a live video of me installing it, but circumstances didn't allow for that. But I'm here to do an explanation of how to install it. It's very simple, and this should help you. Also notice that I did end up visually enhancing the bezel. That is 1/8 inch wide silver pinstriping tape applied in 3 rows. I think it gives it a nice dressed up appearance. But first thing we need to do is we need to get the OEM head unit out of the car. And the first thing we have to do that is remove this panel. And the way we do that is we open up our glove box and we take a panel removal tool like this, if you have one, or a big plastic tool like this, or something that's relatively stiff that you can pry with. And we're going to stick it underneath the edge of this colored panel and just pop out. There are clips holding this panel in place. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And just go around and give this a little pry here and there, and this panel will pop out. Once it's physically disconnected from the dashboard, there is an electrical connector, rectangular, right here. It's got like a U-shaped handle on it. Simply push in the tab, lift that handle up, and it will actually pull the connector out of its socket. Then you can remove this whole panel. Next step is to remove the factory bezel. And let's go into my workshop and I'll show you how to do that. The weather's not so great outside today, so I brought the radio and bezel inside to continue the process. So once you have the color trim panel removed from your dashboard, you're going to need to remove the 2 T25 screws holding this bezel onto the dash. Once these are removed, get behind the edge of this with your pry tool and pop this out. What you're going to find on the back, there are 4 steel studs sticking out of the back of this in the corners. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those studs screw into the plastic. You're going to need to unscrew those, and you can use a 1/4 inch or 6mm wrench to get those out. And you're going to need to transfer them to the XTRONS bezel. Now the XTRONS bezel is not threaded already. The studs will create their own threads when you screw them in. So very carefully put the stud in the same location on the XTRONS bezel, start it in by hand, and then use your 1/4 inch or 6mm wrench to carefully tighten them down. Once you have the bezel out and the studs transferred over, you can take the radio out. Now the radio is held in place by 4 T25 screws. 1, 2, 3, 4. Once you have those out, just slide this out. And on the back, you're going to find the big connector that we've talked about before. There's a U-shaped handle on one end of it. Pushing the tab, pull that handle up, and the connector will pry itself out of the back of the radio. So as you can see here, there is that big connector that we've talked about so much. This is just a support. This is where the dashboard USB connector plugs in. Simply push down on the tab, pull the connector out. And this is where your AM/FM antenna connects. Again, push down on the little tab, pull the connector out. That's all there is to this unit. Now if you have one of the more advanced sound systems, you may have satellite radio, so there'll be an extra connector here someplace for that. But again, it's going to come out the same way. You're going to put in the tab, pull it out. Once you have the factory head unit removed, you're going to find there's a ton of space back here for all the cables. So the next step is to temporarily connect the XTRONS to test it to make sure everything works. So you're going to take your factory wiring harness, you're going to plug it into the XTRONS adapter, and then you're going to plug all the different connections into the back of your XTRONS unit. You're going to plug in your antenna adapter into the factory antenna wire that's back here. Plug that into the XTRONS. If you're going to use the USB port down there, then you're going to use your cable adapter, USB cable adapters, to plug that into the back of the XTRONS. What I found was that my USB port down there is bad. It went bad on me. That's the reason why I'm replacing this, because I thought it was the head unit. It's actually that connector. So what I did instead of using that one is in my glove box here, if you look at the side here, and I know it's dark, I apologize for it, there's a round cover here. If you pry that cover off, you'll find there's a hole. And it's very easy to run a cable from inside this space through that hole to behind the radio. So I simply took the red USB cable, I fed it through the hole here, connected it to the back of my XTRONS, and now I have USB with a USB drive here with all my music on it, hiding out in the glove box. So it's a nice clean install. So like I said, temporarily connect all your wiring together, and then reconnect your battery, turn on the XTRONS and see if it works. If you're able to get radio, if you hear sound, if you open your car doors and you see a notice on here that says your door is open, then pretty much everything is working properly. And at that point, you can go through the process of securing your wiring and putting everything back together. By securing the wiring, I basically mean you don't want all the wiring and the connections flopping around back here, because they can become damaged and they can rattle while you're driving and make noise. So what you want to do is you want to try to bundle things up and neaten things up as best as you can. Zip ties are really good for bundling cables together, but they're not so good at keeping things quiet. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take the large plastic connectors, so the Fiat physical adapter, in fact, the harness, you know what I mean, the big blocky thing, and the CAN bus module. Get some sheet foam and wrap them in foam, and then wrap the foam in this. This is not electrical tape. This is called Tessa tape. It's a fabric-based tape used by auto manufacturers for wrapping wiring. You can get this easily from Amazon or any other place. And simply wrap things up. Wrap up your cables. Wrap up the plastic adapters in that foam, and just put them back there in the space, and you should be good at that point. So once you've got that done, simply push this in, and those 4 pegs will secure it. Put your 2 screws back here to lock it in place. Reconnect your electrical connection here. All you have to do is start inserting that connector into its socket, and then push that U-shaped handle down, and it will actually suck the connector into its socket. And then you literally just pop this back into place. And at that point, you're ready to go. Reconnect your battery, and then we have to go through the process of setting this up. So let's do that next. I'll tell you folks, words are hard today. So once you've installed this, power it up, you're going to see an XTRONS boot screen, and then you're going to see this screen. You're going to scroll to the left, and you're going to see a whole bunch of icons over here for applications and other things. And they're going to look a little bit different than they do here. The default layout is different than what I have it set up for. But the first thing we have to do is tell the head unit what kind of car we have. Now, there's a whole menu of different cars, and the 500X is not specifically listed. But there is a listing for the Jeep Renegade, and the Renegade and the 500X are the same car under the skin. So that's what we're going to use. The way we get to it is we go find the Settings app, tap that, and the second option down is Car Infotainment. And then at the bottom of this menu it says About Device. And in the corner there is a Settings gear icon. Tap that. Now we have to enter a code, and that code is 8878. Okay. And now that brings us into a special configuration menu. Up here at the top it says CAN type. Tap that. Now it shows us all the different types of CAN bus networks there are in this world, and there's lots of them. So tap on all. Now you're going to get a listing of about 300 different types of cars, and you're going to scroll down until you find one that says Jeep Renegade, and you're going to select that one. Then you're going to go up here and you're going to tap Save, and it's going to say, are you sure we're going to have to reboot? And you say, okay. This unit will reboot. It will reconfigure itself to work with a 500X and Jeep Renegade. And at that point, we've done the important part of getting CAN bus and all that stuff set properly. And now we can go through and change a few other settings so that everything works properly. These XTRONS units are highly customizable, and there's a lot you can do with these things, so I encourage you to explore and read the owner's manual to understand what all the different menus do. But there are a couple of necessary settings in here that I want to point out to ensure that everything works properly in your car. First, let's verify that we have the right type of car set. Go into Car Info, Car Type, and we verify that it says Renegade 2016-2018. That's good. So we'll go Home, and we're going to go into Settings, and we're going to go into Car Infotainment, and we're going to go down to Video, and there's a setting in here. It says Disable Video in Motion. You want that turned off. There are some apps and features of this that only work when the car is stopped, and the way that the car detects it's stopped or not is whether the parking brake is engaged. Unfortunately, the XTRONS is not sensing the condition of the parking brake, so it's by default it's preventing you from getting into these different apps and settings. So by turning that off, that disables that security feature, and that allows you to go into things like the built-in instructions for the unit itself, or this here, which is topic switching, which lets you change the theme of your screens. I think those are the only two settings you really need to change to make sure everything works properly. But at this point, if everything looks good, you can go through, you can rearrange these icons by dragging and dropping. I have things set up here. My primary use for this is playing music off of the USB stick that you saw that was in the glove box. So this, so this music button is what does that. Radio plays radio. DSP lets you set equalizers and balance and fade and things like that. Aux in is for using the aux in port that's down there. And then if you're into Bluetooth, you can set up your phone in here. You can do Bluetooth music with this. You can do Android Auto, Apple CarPlay. You can set this up as a 4G hotspot. You can do satellite radio. These things are really nice, and for the price, it's quite a nice unit. So after having lived with this for a week, I found two issues with it. The first, and I verified this with XTRONS customer support, is that there's no way to set the date and time on this head unit through the head unit itself. You either have to connect it to the internet or you have to use GPS time. And I can't understand why you would design something like that. It seems kind of silly to me to omit such an obviously needed feature. The other is the sound quality. Compared to the other cars in our fleet, a Fiat 500 with an XTRONS and a Dodge with its factory a head unit still installed, the sound out of this is not that great. It kind of sounds weak and lacking detail and character, kind of like a cheap boombox, and that kind of surprised me. I suspect the fact that this unit doesn't have a full-size chassis means they couldn't put a full-size amplifier circuit in this, and it's kind of like sound out of a tablet, I guess. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave it installed for now, but I'm kind of toying with the idea of installing an amplifier, maybe get some better sound out of this, and if I do that, I'll shoot another video. So hopefully this kind of a mess of a video has helped you in some way to install this unit into your 500X. So far I'm happy with it. I've only had it installed a couple days. If this was helpful in any way, shape, or form, please let me know in the comments below. Thanks, and have a good day.